The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. Your info is in endless places that could expose you to identity theft, leading to lost funds. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Look, I get it. Maybe you don't think cruises are for you. Or maybe you've been on one and it left you a little cold. I am here to tell you that I've been there and that it does not have to be that way. By the way, I'm Aislyn Greene, and this is Unpacked Minis, our new series. This month, which happens to be the end of wave season, as it's known in the cruise world, we are going to unpack the surprising world of modern cruising. In this, our very first episode, we're busting cruise stereotypes. Michelle Baran, Afar's deputy editor and our resident cruise pro, is here to help us navigate the waters. I'm Michelle, and welcome to our inaugural Unpacked Mini. It is kind of funny that we're here talking about this topic today because I would say that neither one of us really identifies as a cruiser, but I've had two experiences that completely changed my mind around cruising, and it made me think that there really is a cruise for most people, but you do have to know certain things in order to find the right one for you. Otherwise, you might not be that happy with your choice.
Right. I'm just curious, since I cover cruising all the time, like what were your experiences with cruising?
So I will say that I went on a cruise in the Mediterranean that was beautiful. It was completely beautiful. But I didn't walk away from that loving cruising because it was the kind of like where you get off in a port and then you get on a bus for like 3 hours and then you get back on the ship. It was a cool way to see this part of Europe. But I didn't really feel like I got to know the places very well at all. And so that was kind of a bummer and felt like, But then I had this opportunity to go on, it was through Backroads, but they'd partnered with Ama Waterways, and it was a cycling river cruise down the Danube. And it blew my mind because every day, like we went past all the port stops and we were cycling like into the countryside and to these places that you never would go unless you were like some intrepid traveler, maybe doing a road trip.
Right.
And then we'd end the day and you're like back in your hotel room. You don't have to unpack. You get to eat this fabulous food. So for me, it offered this mix of like actual activity plus some way of delving into local culture that I hadn't gotten on that first experience. And then never having to pack and unpack, which I know people say, but it's so nice. It was so nice.
Totally. And first experience definitely brings up some of the stereotypes, which we can get into in a bit, like this idea of that it's very sort of surface level and you don't get to have a deeper dive into the destination. But I love your second example because river cruising is actually how I got into cruising. In my past job before I joined Afar, I was a reporter at Travel Weekly and I covered tour operators and river cruising. And so I was doing tours, and then I got to start experiencing river cruising. And to your point, it was so relaxing compared to the tours because the tours, I was unpacking every night. And I could see why tour operators were getting into river cruising because it was a sort of floating hotel model. And just from a convenience point of view, it was so amazing. But then I also kind of fell in love with waterways and like what they represent, right? There's so much history there, these kind of classic old highways. And it wasn't just Europe. I went on the Mekong and the Yangtze, and suddenly rivers were sort of bringing me to all these different places throughout the world where rivers hold so much importance as far as what they bring to people, how you get around. So yeah, it sort of opened my world to this style of travel that, like you, I was sort of like, like a cruise, it's for older people, retirees. So again, like breaking down some of those stereotypes, it's really humbling. I think it's a great exercise for all of us, no matter what type of travel we're talking about. I think sometimes we think something might not be for us and might not be right.
Exactly. I feel like sustainability is another one. You know, there's some people who are like, I wouldn't do it for that reason, though I find that hard if you fly anywhere for travel.
Right.
Like,
it's a hard argument.
It's kind of a hard argument. Like, unless you're really fully giving up all of that stuff, especially because cruise lines have really change so much and they recognize that their future depends on.
Yeah, exactly. I think cruise lines do get a bad rap in this department because if you look at like a big hotel or, flying, I think it's just because there's such a visual symbol of, like you
all
see,
of it.
Yeah, like you see this huge cruise ship pull into a small port, and I think it just creates this visceral reaction. That being said, like, of course, everybody should be held to account. Like, of course, everything could be better, but it is in the cruise line's interest to continue to work towards making sure that the waters that they sell basically, remain pristine. And the other thing that I think is interesting is that it's the big ships that get the worst rap in this department.
Yeah.
But it's actually the big ships where the most innovation is possible. So the bigger ships have like the most space for things like a really intricate recycling system and composting systems and for all that sort of modern technology in terms of new types of fuel. So I think it's easy to be quick to judge a big vessel. But what I've sort of thought about is looking at them almost as like a science lab of a place where some of the innovations can start to be tried and tested and eventually carried out and maybe produced at scale. Another thing people might want to take into consideration is that there are more rules and regulations in Europe. So if the vessel operates out of Europe, so for example, there's a company called MSC Group that has big ships. They are really pushing the envelope on sustainability because there's just more rules in Europe that like they have to abide by. Also like in polar regions, another area where there's just like a lot of rules and regulations in terms of managing, the size of the ships and how they operate. If you start to dig around, you will get a sense that it's not all just greenwashing, that there are actually cruise lines that are trying to do better.
That's really cool. What are the ones that you feel like are kind of leading the way that someone could feel maybe better about participating in, both on a large cruise ship level and a smaller one?
When we get into polar cruising, Irad Panat, like very great example. There's there's a company called Aurora Expeditions, and they are, I would say, like the gold standard in polar cruising as far as like wildlife, respect, and preservation. Lindblad, National Geographic, obviously has like a great track record with Nat Geo being on board and their scientists. And that's the other kind of cool aspect is a lot of the polar cruises, they have this kind of citizen scientist element. They will sometimes bring experts on board, but they will also have like, the passengers help with certain fact gathering and that sort of thing. So to really feel like you're a part of sort of the learnings that are happening in these regions, right? And then on the complete other side, that one aspect that I find is really fascinating is there's more momentum in sailing ships, which I love because I feel like it's like we're going back to the OG. Is there anything more sustainable than using like the original cruise power, which is wind, right? Like back to the days of like the explorers. And so there are companies like Sea Cloud and Windstar. I know there's one called Island Windjammer. Like you can actually sail on a sailing ship. Some of them like are transatlantic, which I'm like, whoa, that is crazy to me. And then you have like this new generation of vessels that are building sort of these modern wind, devices that then it's more hybrid energy style. But still, cool. I just love this trend towards getting back to like, what about wind?
Yeah. What about wind? Well, and that, like, from an adventure perspective, it seems like a cruise like that might be really up your alley. And,
right.
You can.
Yeah, exactly. And that, again, gets to one of the other stereotypes, which is when we talk about ports that are, over touristed and some of these smaller ships, like the smaller sailing ships and even just small ships in general, they can get to ports that big ships can't get to. The smaller the ship, the more flexibility. So on some of these smaller ships, you'll have things happen where it's almost sort of almost like a democratic, like, hey, do you guys want to, there's something cool happening over here. Do you guys want to skip this port and go see that? And so there are ways that you can get off the cruise path and get into these smaller ships and have it not feel like you're just one of hundreds of thousands of cruise passengers getting off and ticking the boxes and not doing that deep dive.
It seems like there are more interesting itineraries now, like China or countries within Africa, like places that haven't typically been considered quote unquote cruise destinations.
Yeah, no, totally. And again, this gets a little bit to, there are some places that it's harder to get to. There was a great story we just published about circumnavigating Newfoundland in Canada and how there are these places that you get to by ship that you literally cannot get to like there is no way to get there by land. And I love that. But even like to your point, destinations that if you think of Africa, like there's so much coastline, and so cruising is also a great way to cover a lot of ground in a destination where on land, the infrastructure is just a little more challenging. So it is a really lovely way to see certain destinations. I know Viking just launched coastal cruises in China. Cruising along the China coast hadn't been very popular until now. So you're going to kind of see and experience ports that you've never even heard of, like cities you'd never even heard of because they are just not on the map of like the average traveler. What's interesting about itineraries like that is that you have to be the kind of traveler that is open to being like, I've never even heard of this place, but let's go check it out. Versus somebody who already has places in mind that they want to see. And I think that also brings up the issue of freedom. I think freedom is something that comes up a lot, like...
Yes, yeah, like I'm trapped on this itinerary on the ship, like with these people.
Limited time in a destination. And that is something that it is a challenge. Like if you are an independent traveler, you're not going to like those limitations. I think the only way around that is to just add time at the beginning or end to extend your time in the destination so that you have that freedom to roam at your own pace. But it really is, in some places, the most convenient way to get around.
That kind of brings us to this question that I'd wanted to ask around so how would you say you assess if cruising is right for you?
I mean, first of all, I'm always the first one to say, I'm not going to push you to go on a cruise. Like, if it's not for you, it's not for you. I don't own a cruise line.
Nor do I.
So I am not here to sell anybody on a cruise. Like, I am just here to share my experience. And I think it's more about this sort of being open to an experience that you maybe weren't open to. And there's always a few things to consider, like access to the destination. There are just some places you aren't going to be able to get to without a cruise. So maybe that's your first foray in, like through the expedition cruising. Family, obviously, there can be a lot of benefits to cruising with a family, and I mean multi-gen in that sense. So that can be with kids, but that can also be with older generation, with parents. It's almost like, again, going back to that floating hotel model where, okay, we're all hanging out here on the cruise, but there's different activities for everybody. So we can also all split up and do our own thing and do different things for different ages and stages of life. So I think people kind of use it in that way, which I think is a great way to use cruising. Hand off the planning to somebody else, and then everybody can kind of pick and choose what they want. You can have meals together, but you're, sleeping separately. So I think that's a great way in. And then if you really are like cruise-averse, as we say, I would just say then start small. Big ships can be overwhelming, and there's so many great small ship lines. I mentioned some: Windstar, Seabourn, Crystal. There's so many smaller ships where you can like dip your toe, so to speak, into cruising without feeling overwhelmed. The other thing, if there is a larger ship that you're like or you're just, I don't know, it's going somewhere where there aren't smaller ships, my other recommendation is, a lot of them have created these sort of like similar to like an executive level at a hotel. It's sort of like an executive space within the cruise ship. It's like a cruise within a cruise model. And it'll be sort of, a few top decks or something that are reserved, that have like their own pool and their own lounge, maybe even their own restaurant. And so it's a way to maybe get like, if, for example, if you're with kids and you want the amenities like the kids club or some of the bigger restaurants or whatever, but you want to have like a little bit of your own space to retreat to, I would suggest that that's a way to get away from the cruise ship crowds. So there's a few ways to do it, I think. Or river cruising, like we've both experienced. River cruising is a great way to like such a non-intimidating, wonderful way to, again, dip your toe into the cruise waters. What I like about river cruising too is that like I'm a land person, which is kind of funny because we're talking about cruises. But like on river cruises, like you're cruising along the land.
Yeah.
So I feel like you never feel untethered, and it's not rocky. So if you're like somebody, if you get like, seasick, or that's like one of the reasons you're nervous about it, although they've gotten really good about that and there's so many good things that you can take. But yeah, like river cruising, I feel like is a great way to just test it out. And those ships have to be small because their dimensions are limited to the size of the river, and the bridges, they have to be kind of tiny. So yeah, I think that's a great way to get started without feeling like you're like on a serious cruise of some kind.
Totally. Is there anything else that you feel like we should know about how cruising has evolved?
I mean, I would say that all of the things that someone who's cruise averse is worried about, the cruise lines are thinking about too. Even things like food. There's like this long-standing stereotype of like the buffet, and you just go and there's like so much food. And so cruise lines are working to, incorporate better food and healthier food and plant-based options and all of these things that we want as a consumer. There are cruise lines that want to give it to you. Just like dating, really, you have to find your match
and find a cruise matchmaker.
Well, that's what your next episode, like a cruise travel advisor, that will be your cruise matchmaker. Like that's their job, is to match you. They are the pros. They are the ones who like you can tell them I want this, this, and this, and they're like, boom, this is your cruise line.
Thanks for joining our first Unpacked Mini. As Michelle mentioned, next Tuesday we'll get into why hiring a cruise travel agent is the best possible next step. In the meantime, you'll find our favorite cruise resources in the show notes, as well as links to our podcast newsletter Behind the Mic and our website. This has been Unpacked Minis, a podcast from Afar. The podcast is produced by Aislyn Greene and Nikki Kalteland. Music composition by Chris Collin. And remember, the travel world is complicated. We're here to help you unpack it, mini bite by mini bite.